Some killers lurk in the shadows, their identities hidden behind masks of normalcy. But David Parker Ray, an unassuming man from the small town of Elephant Butte, New Mexico, was no ordinary killer. Known infamously as the Toy Box Killer, he operated in plain sight, leaving behind a trail of terror that seemed to defy belief. In a secluded trailer, he built his own twisted hell, where women were not just victims, they were prisoners in a nightmare beyond comprehension. But how did a man, seemingly normal on the outside, turn into the embodiment of evil? What went wrong? David Parker Ray was born in 1939, a time when the world was already consumed by the aftermath of the Great Depression and the beginning of World War II. But unlike most children, Ray's early years were shaped by an abusive home environment. His father, a cruel and distant man, and his mother, who struggled with mental health issues. These formative years were steeped in neglect, violence, and emotional isolation, and they became the foundation for Ray's future depravity. Most children are taught to trust and love their parents, to seek affection and guidance from their caregivers. But Ray's world was devoid of this warmth. His father, who would often physically and emotionally punish him, created an environment that was one of fear and submission. Ray's mother, meanwhile, was emotionally absent, unable or unwilling to offer him the care he so desperately needed. By the time Ray reached adulthood, the emotional scars of his childhood had already begun to fester. His need for affection had been replaced by a need for control. A deep-seated, uncontrollable urge to dominate and manipulate those around him took root. But it wasn't until his exposure to disturbing material that the true darkness within him would begin to take shape. Ray's sexual fantasies were far from ordinary. Influenced by violent pornography and sadistic fantasies, he became obsessed with the idea of power, control over others, specifically women. His deepening interests in BDM and violent sexual behavior were not the initial signs of his predatory instincts. No, they were a warning bell. But to understand the man, we must dig deeper. What truly set Ray on his path of terror was his childhood. An upbringing devoid of compassion and human connection set him up for a life of unimaginable cruelty. But Ray didn't act alone. He found an accomplice, a woman named Cindy Hendy, whose role in his crimes would be both supportive and equally sinister. Together, Ray and Hendy would lure victims, often women, into their twisted lair, a makeshift dungeon hidden within the confines of a rundown trailer. This dark sanctuary would soon become a place of terror, a toy box of unimaginable horror. Inside the toy box, Ray created a cruel and sadistic playground. Victims were drugged, restrained, and subjected to hours or even days of torture. The chamber, a nightmarish fusion of bondage and psychological terror, was equipped with devices meant for one purpose: inflicting pain. It was a place where women were nothing more than objects, stripped of their humanity, reduced to mere tools for Ray's sadistic pleasure. Ray's control over his victims went beyond the physical. He would meticulously record their suffering, capturing every agonizing scream, every tear of despair. It wasn't just the physical pain that thrilled Ray. It was the emotional and psychological power he wielded over them. Each act was calculated, methodical, and terrifyingly precise. But what drove him to these extremes? Why did he need to control and dominate to such a grotesque degree? David Parker Ray's crimes weren't just the result of twisted sexual desires. They were an expression of his rage, a rage that had been building for years. His father's cruelty, his mother's indifference, and his own feelings of inferiority fused together into a perfect storm of violence and control. His victims were nothing more than pawns in a sick game, a way for Ray to assert power in a world that had denied him any. As Ray's crimes escalated, he grew bolder, more brazen. He would kidnap women, often targeting those who seemed vulnerable or desperate. They would be drugged, bound, and subjected to unimaginable pain. Ray's victims were often chosen for their vulnerability. His strategy was to isolate them, making them helpless, breaking their willpower piece by piece. But it wasn't just physical torture. Ray used fear, manipulation, and degradation to break his victims. They were made to feel worthless, insignificant, and utterly helpless. And what made this even more chilling was Ray's detachment. He didn't see them as human beings. He saw them as mere objects, his toys to manipulate and destroy at will. One by one, women began to escape Ray's clutches, but they would carry the scars of his torture for the rest of their lives. Some would die, their bodies discarded as if they were nothing more than trash. Ray's ability to dispose of them, to strip them of their dignity in death, made him a monster, one whose lust for control was never satisfied. But Ray wasn't invincible. His reign of terror came to an end in 1999, when one of his victims, Cynthia Vigil, escaped his clutches and managed to alert the authorities. It was only then that the horrifying reality of Ray's crimes began to unfold. Police uncovered tapes of his torturous sessions, and what they found was unimaginable, evidence of the horror he had inflicted on countless women. But Ray's story doesn't just end with his arrest. His legacy is one of mystery, and we are left asking, what truly went wrong? The story of David Parker Ray is a grim reminder of the dark depths of the human mind, how childhood trauma, neglect, and rage can fuse together to create a killer. And yet, despite his crimes, Ray was only a symptom of a deeper issue, a society that often turns a blind eye to the warning signs, a society that failed to stop him before it was too late. So, what went wrong? The answer may never be clear, but what is clear is this: we must never forget the victims. We must continue to ask, to understand, and to seek justice for those who no longer have a voice.